I'm wondering if you can speak to differences in what you see in priorities of Gen Z Republicans versus Gen Z Democrats, if you've looked at that issue at all, because I think that is also an issue that's not parsed, but in all of the problems and issues in foreign policy and domestic policy discussions we've had today, that is one area that I don't think people are looking at. Yes, there's a difference between Republicans and Democrats, but what about the younger generation, which is rising as voters, as leaders? There's, the cabinet is younger. I know Biden's not younger, but the cabinet is younger. What is the differences? What are you seeing the differences in this rising generation?
Sure. Yeah, and there are public opinion polls that indicate that there are differences. I think the most striking one to me is that the youngest generation of Americans tend to be more skeptical of military intervention overseas. And that's on both sides of the aisle. So Republicans as well. And I see this among my students in class as well, undergraduate as well as graduate. And if you think about it, it makes sense. What has their life been? It's not like Nick and I growing up in the 80s, seeing Reagan kind of face down the Soviets, right? Which might give you some optimism as to the possibility for the sort of muscular foreign policy. What they've seen, I'm talking about, let's say, students in their 20s, their entire life is frustration. Frustration in Iraq, frustration in Afghanistan, frustration in Libya. I mean, we can't seem to do anything right when it comes to military intervention. So the youngest generation of Republicans, I'm not saying it's monolithic. I mean, there's a variety, and there are some that are still pretty hawkish, but it is striking that 20-something Republicans and even 30-something, seems to me, tend to be more skeptical based on their observations. And I think that ties into a broader sense that they ask themselves, why is it a given with the foreign policy elite of the country in both parties that things have to continue to be the same way they've been for 70 to 80 years? I mean, why would we have to have the exact same commitments overseas that we had starting in the 1940s and 50s? There is a kind of almost theological element to it, right? It's sometimes argued as if we must maintain every single commitment we've made and acquired over that lifetime, the equivalent of a full human lifetime. And I think the youngest generation in particular says, why? I mean, conditions have changed. Wouldn't it make sense to respond and adapt? I mean, the Cold War ended 30 years ago, right? So that's something I hear, and I think that has crept in more and more, right, left, and center.